Happy Friday. Welcome back. Concepts and Training. Continuing to dive onto some of these programming concepts and hitting periodization, right? Because we talked about overload, we talked about skill acquisition. Well, really, how do we fit all these things together? It's called periodization, right? So there's a couple different types of periodization we have. We're going to talk a little bit more about linear here, because linear really helps us break some of these things down when we go through and then try to develop these programs long term. If we get into undulating or DUP, daily undulating periodization, a lot of people call that like a conjugate method. Really, there's a bunch of different ways you can approach it, but we're going to talk about linear because linear really helps us, and we'll talk about DUP and undulating at a later time. When we look at overloading and kind of breaking down, linear periodization often gets referred to as block periodization, because we basically break up chunks of a time frame to focus on specific goals and specific outcomes that layer into our end goal, right? So if we look at saying, hey, I want to run a 5K on this date, and you sign up for a race and say, we have 6 months until 5K time, all right? Or a half marathon, whatever, right? Those are really common ones that people tend to set. When we look at layering those skills and layering that ability, right? So what we start to do, we start to break down the things that are going to be needed to complete that goal into chunks, right? So, you know, some of those things are overloading strength, especially if you're looking at any kind of aerobic capacity, overloading aerobic capacity and building that, building any kind of anaerobic capacity, any kind of speed or skill that we really need to have, you know, time spent on. So, you know, a really common one that we see is a very simple kind of flow. We have a period of anatomical adaptation, or what we call a volume or bodybuilding phase. Some people also consider a GPP phase, so general physical preparedness. Then when we look at, you know, adding on to that, then we start to look at either going into strength or kind of this conversion to strength phase, and then also, especially if you're looking at more aerobic work, looking at some intro to endurance and maybe some just general endurance and anaerobic capacity building, okay? Then we start to look at layering that in and taking that strength into power, and starting to convert it to power. So we've built some anatomical adaptation, some muscle, and we've built some of the skills, right? Same thing, in that time frame, we're probably going to build any of our skills. You know, like I said, if it's running, well, we might look at like gait cycles and just general skills, making sure our patterns, our movement patterns are on point. Then we start to look at, you know, in that strength or conversion to strength, kind of that time frame, we're going to look at building on more skills, so we have actual runs that are involved. So like I say, we're going to keep this 5K example a little bit better. Building any kind of strength we need, building any kind of patterns and progressing those. And then we can kind of go into this peaking phase, right? A lot of times if you're looking at power sports like football, they'll use like a conversion to power and then a peak power phase to be able to optimize their performance on a field, right? So when we look at, you know, more common goals that you see, especially if you're an adult, it's kind of, you know, work on just general health and fitness. You set these little things like a Spartan race or, you know, obstacle race, 5K, half marathon, marathon. We start to overload those skills. We've kind of got our adaptation anatomically, so, you know, work on muscle qualities. Then we start to look at strength and kind of building, you know, better patterns and layering skills on. And then we look at actual conversion to, you know, the specific skill, right? And those are all blocked down. A lot of times we see this as like month-long blocks or 6-week blocks. Sometimes it's 2, depending on how much time you've got. We kind of chunk these things up, right? That's what we consider periodization, because what it looks like over time is we have this period where we're here, and we progressively overload, and we kind of take a step up, and we're here, and we progressively overload, we take a step up, and we keep going, right? And we climb the ladder over time, right? And in those time frames, then we start to build in deload weeks and things like that. Now, when we look at how periodization is often broken down, basically we have 3 different things we think about. We have a macro cycle. So if we look, and like I said, you have 6 months to 5K, well, your 6 months is your macro cycle. Then we start to break down into more specific. Well, out of that 6 month, each month is going to be a mesocycle. So it's going to be a specific focused cycle within the bigger picture, right? And then within that, we have our microcycle, so our daily or our weekly plan that's going to help build into that. right? Think of it like a puzzle a little bit, right? So if I have a tiny little puzzle piece and it fits and has its own tiny little blueprint, and then it fits into kind of, this JPEG, right? Or JPEG, I don't know if that's really the right word, but thinking about a puzzle, it fits in this group of pieces that start to form a little bit of the picture. And then that little bit of picture combined with other components fit into the huge picture that make the final end product, right? So when we look at periodization, we're really looking at understanding how to utilize different goals, chunking things into tiny little puzzle pieces that fit into a group of puzzle pieces that form to make a big picture when combined with the other ones, right? And we do that in these little phases of specific either overloading, anatomical adaptations, right? Whether it's going to be adding load, adding volume, adding time under tension, being able to understand that as we utilize those things, we're going to start to dive in, we're going to start to progress over time towards our goal. So that's an overview of periodization, specifically linear periodization or block periodization, in terms of how to start implementing things in training to get a better effect out of where you want to go.